Ala. Ala is a important partner to Manara. She's a filmmaker and she's much more. She's an inspiration to so many people in the MENA region, including women, but not only women. And Ala has been a big, big, important partner to Manara for a long time. Ala, كيف حالك?
Alhamdulillah, all good. I've been entering the wrong passcode until Hadil saved my life and sent it to me on WhatsApp. But I'm really happy to be part of this again. And it's always actually refreshing to see um, how Manara and let's say Manara participants and group and activities are growing among different people, especially I would say, would lean into the women's side more when it comes to software engineer, because I do feel the lack of opportunities and for them. So I'm really happy to be part of this again.
Ala, how did you first hear about Manara, and what were some of the things you thought about when you first learned about what we do?
Actually, I've heard about it through my sister. She studied in Germany, and then she did her PhD, and then she's working in San Francisco. And she's like, there's this woman called Hadil. I've met her, and she has this amazing startup, and she's from Gaza, and she does these amazing things with women and software engineer. And it was a conversation that had nothing to do with working or being part of a Manara yet. And then a few months later, Hadil got in touch with me and she was telling me about Manara. I'm like, no, like this is such a small world. And through that, my relationship with Hadil and with you and with Manara team started. And I actually thought it's just one project, we're going to work together. But for some reason, which I like, no, it's not for some obvious reason, that people kept actually texting me and asking me about Manara, even when I'm not talking about Manara. So for them, it's like, did Manara open the applications yet? Can we apply for Manara right now? And I felt like a Manara ambassador, and that was nice. And currently, with all the aggression happening in Gaza, I have people from Gaza right now with lack of internet. I have messages on my DM. People asking me, like, are we starting exactly like at 8? Can I enter late if I had bad internet and connections? Do I have to turn on my camera because the internet is slow? So it's very inspiring that Manara is not only helping those who are able to seek different opportunities around the world, and also those who lack opportunities or find it extremely challenging to find them. So yeah, this is how I heard about Manara, and this is why I'm happy to be part of this always.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know for our team, so my co-founder Leila is from Gaza. We met in Gaza,
Layla. Yes.
and
Yes.
and we have a big community in Gaza, and we've always hesitated since the aggression started on whether to keep, you know, keep doing everything that we do or not. And one of the things that inspired us to keep putting on events, to keep working towards our mission, was seeing that when we put anything on, people from Gaza show up, and people are hungry to be living their lives throughout
Yes.
the region. Of
Yes.
course,
And sorry,
connectivity is limited.
I said Hadil because I talked to Hadil mostly, but it's Layla.
It's fine. It's
But
fine. It's
yeah,
fine.
because
One
I'm
last
in
thing
touch with
from
Hadil
you.
all the time.
One last thing from you, Ella, as we settle in. I think we have almost everybody who's going to be joining now with us. I know a lot of people were having problems with the passcode, just like you. So at this point, I think most people have settled in. Hella bil Arabi, now in Arabic. What advice do you have for people who are joining this call today, whose English may not be completely fluent? The event is in English. Any tips for people who, maybe don't feel completely comfortable with English?
Um, okay, so basically, I'm trying to read here, and people think I'm from Egypt and different countries. I'm from Syria, but living abroad. So different countries. I'm from Gaza, currently in Gaza. I'm from Jordan, Palestine. So basically, you have to know English as a web developer seeking opportunities worldwide. This is something that is a must. However, in this conversation, if you feel lost، إذا بتحسوا حالكم ضايعين شوي ومش عارفين مش فاهمين كل اللي عم بينحكى بالإنجليزي ask us in the chat area. You can ask us, put the questions here. People are extremely helpful. I always say Zoom's 50%, like this webinar would give them 50% amazing content. And for those who can't really grab everything that is said, 50%, the rest is you can find it in the chat because people are really helpful. فالناس كتير حيكونوا يساعدوكم بجهة الشات. أي سؤال عندكم إياه، معلومة هيك حسيتوا حالة طارت ما لقطوها، اكتبوا السؤال عندكم بالشات، الناس كتير حتساعدكم والتيم موجود. اللي أنا موجودة، هديل، so different يعني أشخاص. ليلى will be helpful from chat. I'm not sure if this is the same Layla, so it's the first name, but they will help you in the chat ويساعدوكم بالإجابات ويسألوا أي أسئلة بدكم إياهم. If I may say this message in Arabic and English, I'll mix and match. الجلسة هاي كتير مهمة لأنها حتفتح لكم باب لقدام بمجال السوفت وير انجينير. ممكن يكون الموضوع هلا انكم فعلا هيك تلمع ببالكم فكرة أو تشاركوا أو تجاوب على سؤال لكم، وممكن لاحقا. منارة فكرتها مش بس هلا، منارة بتشتغل 24/7. منارة جوب انها تساعدكم تلاقوا وظيفة بمجال السوفت وير انجينير تشبككم مع جهات، وكذلك خلال ذلك تطور من قدرتكم على انكم تكونوا a good fit، يعني مناسبين لوظيفة انتم بتطمحوا لها. فبتقدم تدريبات، ورشات، they follow up with you, they give one-on-one sessions, guidance. so كتير مهم تضلوا حاضرين هاي الجلسة، وكذلك تضلكم حاضرين الإيميلات اللي بتوصل على منارة. So we
I
can
think that
start the
was,
session. I'm sorry,
yeah. That
yeah.
was such a wonderful intro, Ella. Thank you. We are going to go ahead and get started now. We're so grateful again for your partnership, and thank you so much for joining. With that, I'll go ahead and give a brief intro on Manara and on Qualtrics. And if we could just go to the agenda slide, that's 2 slides back, please, so that we can walk everyone through the agenda first. So we are right on track with housekeeping and just introducing Manara. We're going to be moving forward soon to the panelists today. Today's talk is sponsored by Qualtrics, and we have an amazing panel with all speakers from Qualtrics who are going to be telling us about how to use AI responsibly. What I want you all to know is we will be saving a lot of time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, whether it's on today's topic or anything else, working at Qualtrics, any questions about Manara and what we do, any questions for the speakers and their personal stories about their careers, anything, you can fit that into the Q&A. Please do use the Q&A feature to ask questions. If you ask them in the chat, then our team will help you move it to the Q&A just to make sure that we don't lose your question. If you can move on to the next slide now. For housekeeping, I think we've already spoken about all of this. If you have, the event is in English. If you don't feel comfortable asking your question in English, you can ask it in Arabic, and we'll make sure that somebody translates it. We do have an Arabic speaker on the panel. مهند معنا، مهند من غزة وبيحكي عربي بالطلاقة. فإذا بنحتاج مترجم، عندنا مترجم in the panel. Okay, moving on now about Manara and about me really quickly, and then we'll kick in with the panel. Manara, in case you haven't heard about us today, we are a social impact startup. Our mission is to connect the top tech talent in the Middle East and North Africa to the best jobs in the world. We are here to help you accelerate your careers. My name is Ilyana Montauk. I am the CEO and co-founder of Manara. Our alumni work at world-class companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, Qualtrics, and many more. Now, moving on to the next slide. We are here today with the first ever Manara Tech Talk in partnership with Qualtrics. Greg, I would love to hand it over to you to introduce Qualtrics briefly before we introduce the panelists.
Yes, thanks a lot. I'm happy to do this. So I just wanted to talk for a brief moment about Qualtrics, so what we are doing at Qualtrics. So could we go to the next slide? Yes, so on this slide, you can see logos of companies which are collaborating with us, which are using Qualtrics, buying our products and services. You can see brands like Toyota, Samsung, Google, so the brands that you probably know. And they are deciding to use Qualtrics to basically serve their customers in a better way. So they would like to understand what their customers are thinking about their products, about their services. And Qualtrics, we have a set of solutions and services which are helping our customers, like companies, for example, like Google, to listen to their customers via surveys, or even Qualtrics is monitoring what customers are talking about Google or about, let's say, Toyota on social media. We are able to process this data, and then we also have solutions to understand the data, to analyze the data, so our customers can derive some insights. So what they should do to improve the customer satisfaction. And on this slide, as you can see, we created so-called experience management category. We have 3 million plus frontline users, and we are being used by over 18,000 customers on a daily basis, which includes almost 85% from the top 100 companies in US. Yeah, so this is the intro to Qualtrics.
Thank you so much. One more thing I want to add about Qualtrics is that Qualtrics is one of my favorite companies in the world personally. I first heard about Qualtrics because my favorite manager that I've ever had, somebody who was my manager when I worked at Google, moved on and later worked at Qualtrics, and was the chief people officer of Qualtrics. And his passion was all about how do you help people be good managers so that you can build really excellent companies. And so ever since then, I've loved seeing what you do. And at a certain point in time, Qualtrics opened an office not only in the United States and in Ireland, which was very common for tech companies, but also in Poland, which has become a growing hub for tech companies, in Krakow specifically, which is where I'm from. So I've always had a great time when I come back to Krakow visiting Qualtrics in the office and seeing how cool your office is with the game room and all of the things that you have there, all the perks for the employees. Would love to go ahead and introduce all of the panelists that we have here today and kick off with the topic. We have a really interesting topic, a really timely one for what's going on in the world, especially for software engineers, but not only for software engineers right now. So I'm going to go ahead and call on each of you to just offer a quick introduction. Greg, since you were just speaking, let's go ahead and learn about you. Who are you? What do you do at Qualtrics? And what brought you to Qualtrics?
So I'm Greg. I'm with Qualtrics for almost 4 years right now. I started as an applied scientist, and then I moved into a manager position. I'm right now managing a machine learning team in Krakow, and my team is partnering with other internal teams at Qualtrics to help develop products that are using ML or artificial intelligence. My background is in medical image processing, and I also have PhD in this field from a university in the Netherlands. And prior to Qualtrics, I was working in Germany at a research institute. And what brought me to Qualtrics was the possibility to start and grow and shape a small team at that time. It was 2020, a small research team, which ended up in me being manager of that team. Yeah, so that's about me.
Very nice to meet you, Greg. Welcome. And Serena, let's get your introduction. Same questions.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. My name is Serena Jebley. I did my PhD at the University of Toronto in computer science with a focus on natural language processing for health applications. And I previously worked on machine translation and speech synthesis during my master's. So I actually worked a little bit on English to Arabic and Arabic speech synthesis, but my Arabic's a little rusty now, so sorry about that. But it's a great language and I love it. So what brought me to Qualtrics was that I actually, after I finished my PhD, there was a startup out of U of T that was working on using AI to improve the work experience for employees by using communication data to figure out how people were doing automatically without using surveys. So Qualtrics actually acquired our startup, and we're continuing to work on the same project at Qualtrics. And so I'm now a senior machine learning scientist, and we're continuing to use AI to prevent burnout in the workplace and also to improve the well-being of employees and managers.
That is one of my passions, and so it's wonderful to see AI being put to really good use. With that, let's go ahead and introduce Lucinda. Welcome, Lucinda.
Hi, hello. So I'm not software engineer, although I studied computer science. So from education, I could be. I'm a UX designer since at Qualtrics a little bit more than 4 years now. And what brought me to Qualtrics is actually the product, because as the UX designer, I'm focusing on user needs, and our product is connected to the experience and user needs in the values of the product. So that's why I'm here. Thanks.
Welcome. And last but not least, Mohanad. Mohanad is a Manara alum, so he is a speaker that I have known for a long time since he first joined Manara. And excited for your introduction, Mohanad. Welcome to the panel.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Mohanad Bouhassira. I've been working with Qualtrics for a year and a half right now, joined as a software engineer. Like Eliana said, I've been a Manara alumni for like roughly 2 years right now. What brought me to Qualtrics, or how I was connected to Qualtrics, is that I was just like you guys here in this webinar, was just a participant in Manara. And during the job hunting phase, I was applying to different companies, including Qualtrics, and got my offer to join Qualtrics, or I got my offer with Qualtrics in early 2022, and joined to work in their office in Krakow months after that, in mid-August last year, or 2022.
Welcome, welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. My first question is, AI is obviously being spoken about by lots and lots of people these days. How is it impacting you personally, whether at work or in your own life? How are you using it, or how are you feeling about it? And I think this is a question that applies to everyone on the panel. So let's go ahead and just have maybe Lucina, you can start by unmuting yourself and sharing your own answer.
Yeah, so I'm using AI as my daily tool now. So ChatGPT is my starting point for gathering insights, ideas, and it's first brainstorming partner. It shortcuts my everyday job, actually. I'm using it so professionally. I'm using it to brainstorm and to improve my writing. So I'm not connecting so much with UX content designers anymore, because all error statements and labels are provided by AI to me. In my personal life, I'm using it to ask about nice destinations in the city. So I'm planning to go to Egypt this year. So I'm asking a lot of questions: what to visit, where to go, and how to commute between places. And yeah, that's my summary.
If you're going to Egypt this year, this is a great place to ask questions as well. You should go ahead and ask not only ChatGPT or AI, but ask in the Zoom chat and see what advice you get from other Egyptians who are here on the event.
I would love to gather your insights and your recommendations.
Okay, if anyone has any advice on where to go to Egypt, write it in the chat and we'll see if it's better than the advice that you got from ChatGPT. Greg, would love to hear from you as well. How are you using AI right now? How is it impacting your life?
Yeah, so maybe on the impact. So I'm involved with this field like ML AI like since quite some time, right? And right now we have this hype with Gen AI, with large language models and some models which can create beautiful images given a prompt, right? So it's getting it's accelerating, so it's quite hard for me right now to keep up to date with all the advancements. So this is, I guess, from the personal and professional perspective, quite a difficult task to stay on top, and this is basically my job, because like a lot of people are getting into the field, are like a lot of papers, because this is basically where a lot of interesting things is happening. And to comment on this Gen AI thing, I'm just treating it as a new tool, or a new thing that I can use to extend my toolbox when it comes to different approaches to solve different problems. And personally, I'm using this for like coding. I wanted to learn how it's being used, and you can actually be quite it's a very useful tool, especially when you learn how to use it. So because the some plugins that you can use for your favorite code editor, which are powered by ChatGPT or by other models, they are working in certain situations. So it's important for you to develop a sense when it makes sense to use them, when it makes sense to trust them, and when you are better off on like just thinking on your own how to approach a given, let's say, coding task. And as Lucina said as well, I'm thinking about other creative ways how to use them. So, for example, and personally, like when I'm negotiating with someone, or I would just give it a try with ChatGPT, what kind of arguments I can use, right? Because it's like a free, let's say, sparring partner when it comes to negotiations. Also, I'm very bad at terminal commands. I never know how to list and maybe filter some files when I'm, for example, looking for some files with a specific extension. Now I have ChatGPT, I can just ask it and I will know. I'm terrible at those things, and I know this is bad for me. And also I like playing with those models which are generating images. For example, whenever I want to post a funny image on our team channel at work, for example, because someone achieved something nice, I can these days, instead of creating a meme, I can generate a cool image which is specific to a certain situation, which basically, yeah, which is even more fun. Yeah, so that's how I'm using it, I would say.
I love that example of bringing fun to work and also of using it to practice negotiating and seeing the kinds of points the other person might bring up. I'm going to loop back to you after everyone else has shared their thoughts, Greg, to hear about an example where it worked well as a code partner, like to help you code, and a situation where maybe you shouldn't use it, where it actually was not helpful. But before we get to that, would love to hear from everybody else. Mohammed, how are you using Gen AI these days? How is it impacting your life?
Sure. When it comes like from my personal life, I use it like as a mentor or someone to speak with. That's something I've recently done a lot. Like it's crazy how much you can speak to AI, and suddenly just like after some time you forget that this is just a robot. It's not a person, and then you start building some like connection to that person, because you can, like I said, use it as a mentor, asking a bunch of questions. That's of course in addition to what Lucina was saying about like figuring out a few things I want to do in my life, personal life, some responsibility I want to do. When it comes to my work as a developer engineer, I think it's pretty obvious. It can be used like you can use generative AI to produce some template or some code when you're facing some issue in your task or your ticket. You want to start with something, some template, get some ideas on how, not even like to get to the point of solving the ticket, get the best solution you can, or the best design on how you can approach some problems. And of course, something that I've using recently is to figure out how I can also get the best code or the cleanest code I can have, rather than refactoring it later in pull requests, for example.
Yeah, that sounds like a little bit like using it as a code reviewer. So you'll have it actually review your code before you submit it, instead of having a colleague at work catch those errors in the cleanliness of the code, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Best way to reduce the amount of comments you can get in
That's
these
great.
reviews.
That's great. Make your code better before it gets submitted. Love it. And Serena, how are you using Gen AI right now?
Yeah, definitely the coding assistants are really helpful. Also at Qualtrics, we have an automated scheduling tool. So you can ask it to schedule a meeting for you with specific people, or to block a certain amount of time in your calendar. And it also has an assistant that can join your Zoom meetings and automatically take notes, and it will send you a summary afterwards. So I found that really helpful with just handling some of the administrative tasks and managing my schedule, and also like if I miss a meeting, I can just go look at the notes and they're always there. And so that's been really helpful.
What about when people get nervous about using it, like, was it easy for you to just start using it? Were you, and this I'm going to ask to everybody on the panel as well, or whoever is inspired and wants to answer. You know, for some people, they just jumped in right away as soon as these tools became available and started using them. And for some of us, it's taken us a little bit longer. Maybe it makes us nervous. Maybe it's just not something that we're used to using yet. So were all of you early adopters? And do you have any tips for people who maybe have not started using these tools yet?
I guess I can comment on this. So I was tracking the, let's say, the developments more or less quite closely. And I was at first reluctant because like this is not the first time. We already had the same with, let's say, in the computer vision field, when we suddenly were able to match human level performance when it comes to classifying, let's say, 10 classes of different items on an image. So it sounds quite impressive, but when you really know how those things work, you know, okay, probably it will take some time. So this was a similar approach for me for those large language models. And I didn't jump on this, but watching different podcasts on the internet, and I think I strongly recommend Lex Fridman. This guy has a lot of high quality content, interviews with people from AI world, but not only. And he was interviewing Andrej Karpathy, who is he has a famous course at I think at Stanford about convolutional neural networks. And then he was then working at Tesla as head of AI. And he was recommending to start using those tools, especially the code assistants, and making a clear remark that it's very important to develop like a muscle to know when it makes sense to use them. And at that point, I thought, okay, so if this guy is recommending this, so this is certainly a thing, so I should try to give it a try. So this was basically how I got into this, like more close, and then I was paying more attention to what kind of tools are getting up there, coming up, and then trying to give it a try to just see what's possible with this new, let's say, wave of technology.
Thank
So
you. Anyone
for
else
me,
have, yeah, Lucinda, go ahead.
yeah, so for me, it was similar like for Grzegorz. I was first observing how it grows and how topics are emerging on the internet. But then we had the first project with how to implement or how to use ChatGPT or AI at Qualtrics, and I was designing the future solution with usage of tools like ChatGPT. And I was curious what we can use and how it works. So I've done a few courses open from Google on Udemy and stuff like that to understand how actually ChatGPT is working and to not let ChatGPT hallucinate and to not be too not be too enthusiastic about that. So I had some honeymoon, and then I was like, okay, so there are topics that ChatGPT and AI can help me with, but then I still need to be how to say it, have the limited trust to what to what AI is saying to me. And that's how it started. And now I'm just using it and checking. I invest a few hours or maybe days in testing different approaches to prompt engineering and how to mastering myself in that.
So I see there's a bunch of questions on this topic, so I'm going to stick to it a little bit longer before we go about how to use it responsibly, right? So first we'll just keep talking a little bit about how you all are using it, period. You just mentioned, Lucinda, that you've been investing time. It takes time to figure out how to use these tools. Greg, I think you mentioned the same thing. I think this might be more of a general kind of question and advice for software engineers. Obviously, it's a field where you have to continuously be developing your skills. Whatever you learned in university or in your first job is not what you're going to necessarily need 10 years into the career, right? How do you, each of you professionally, make sure to save time or make time to continue developing your skills, including with Gen AI right now? But I think it's a broader question, really. Does it fit in on the job? Is it just something you do while working? Is it something you build into your sprints with your team? How do you make sure that you do actually make the time to keep developing your skills? Anyone have an answer to that question? It looks like Mohammed, maybe you wanted to speak.
Sure. The way I can use like generative AI to develop my skills is basically if I'm facing like an issue or something, I'm not sure where to start. I can use generative AI to give me guidance on how I can solve it. I can directly also like get to the solution or how it will propose the solution, but at the same time, I would seek more like documentation or where some guidance or starting point to direct me on that solution, or even like if I'm starting with a new technology, can also expand on that. So so you can say that it can be a good starting point. It used to be Google, but I feel like now with tools like ChatGPT or any AI tool, it can be a good guidance on how you can get started with some technology, some problem, like anything, like even like for your personal career can be very, very helpful.
So it sounds like partly it's actually saving you time because it's faster than Googling things. And how else, Mohanna, do you make the time to learn how to use new tools or develop your skills? Is it on the job during your workday? Is it weekends, nights? When should software engineers be working on developing their skills? How do you prioritize it when life is busy?
In that case, I would make sure like to allocate some time, probably like an hour per day. We also like in Qualtrics have something called the QAD, where you can allocate 10% of your time for developing your skills or developing your career. It shouldn't be about the team it shouldn't be like the technologies that you have for your team. It can be anything you want for you to develop your skills. Weekends are also something that's good because you can wake up whenever you want. You have the full day. So I would say if I want to develop, like if there is something interesting I wanna or I'm excited to learn about, and it's something I'm sure it will guide me or make me progress in my career, it would definitely be something where I can allocate some time during the week, and I would focus more on the weekends. This is where I would give more time.
Yeah, I can maybe add to what Mohamed just said. I think it's quite important to stay curious and be interested in that. So then, like I think it will automatically happen that you will find the time to like read something about this, right? And then just like put your boundaries even at work. That okay, I would like to have some time to develop myself, and then I think most of the companies, especially in big tech, they are more than welcome to give you some time. So you can be creative, right? So this is quite, but I think just stay interested and be curious about the field that you're interested in. And I would recommend finding good sources of high quality information. So I have my mailing lists that I'm like newsletters that I'm subscribing. Some of them are paid because like I just found that it makes sense to pay like those, let's say $10 per month, because some person is like taking the time to put up a high quality content with some interesting stuff which is happening. So it's easier for me to keep up to date. And also I'm like trying, for example, whenever I'm commuting to work or let's say in a car, I will like sometimes I will turn on like Spotify, but sometimes I will listen to Lex Friedman, for example, just to see what like some interesting person from the field of AI is talking about, so I can basically have a broader perspective what's happening. So that's my two cents to this.
Love those answers. It looks like Lucina, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, because Grzegorz said that you need to be curious and interested in the field, and actually it doesn't cost so much time on every day, so just try it, just test it. No one will, I don't know, check your answers or ChatGPT answers that you had. Just think about creative usage of ChatGPT, and maybe start just peacefully and try to wider your horizons with that. Like, there is no need to have dedicated time if you don't have like design project or software project adjusted to AI, but just use it in everyday work or anything.
And Greg, you mentioned some newsletters that you subscribe to or newsletters that you recommend. If you could write them in the chat for everyone to know what you find are good sources. We do see some questions about people wondering how they can stay up to speed, and they've already written down Lex Friedman's name. So any other tips of who to follow, you can just write down in the chat. We will come back to some of the Q&A questions at the end, but now I would like to go to the main topic for today, which is around using AI responsibly. In addition to just using it, period, we all have an obligation to be thinking about what are the risks with Gen AI and what can we do to mitigate some of those risks. And one of the risks that pops up, or one of the things that I know people often think about, is data. What data can be used? At Qualtrics, how do you all think about this? How do you, I assume you have access, I mean, I know you have access to immense amounts of data from all of your customers and the data that they're gathering through your tools. How do you think about using that data or other people's data responsibly? And anyone who wants to jump in and answer, go ahead.
I can start maybe because I work on AI projects and obviously we need data for training. One of the things that we try to keep in mind is what the customer allows us to do. So we try to be very transparent with customers about how we're going to use our data. We have policies about making sure that data is not identifiable. We use anonymization with a lot of the text that we use. So for what I work on, we end up with a lot of text data. So we run it through a tool to make sure that it removes things like names and addresses and emails, so that if someone were to gain access to it, it wouldn't have anyone's personal information in it. But also just giving options to our customers. So in general, once we anonymize our data, we use it for certain things, but we have plenty of customers who say, hey, we don't want you to use our data for training. And we just make a note of that. And we make sure that we give them a range of options of how they want their data to be used. And we find that some customers are really excited actually about us using their data. And they'll say, hey, you don't have to, you don't have to anonymize this, just take our data and run it through a model or train a model for us, because they really want us to use it. So I think just giving customers those options and making it clear to them how their data is being used. And some people will be more open to it than others.
And when you say customers, you're speaking about the end user who's entering the data. So for Qualtrics, your tools are used by Google and all these other big companies, Uber, et cetera. But ultimately, it's not them who make the decision of how their data gets used. It's the actual user filling out the data on the, like somebody like me gets to decide whether my data gets used or not. Is that what how you think about it?
For us, it's usually at the company level. So our customer would be like Google and they would give us the data. But usually when you complete a survey or something, there should be an explanation. And I think that's something we offer in the Qualtrics tool. There should be an explanation of how your data might be used so that people are aware when they're filling out the survey what's going to happen to their data. But then the decision of what we're allowed to do with the data comes from our customers.
Anything else about data and how to make sure to use data responsibly?
Like small addition from my side is that it's important to know that Qualtrics is not owning the data. We are only processing the data. So like even if the data is on our servers, we are only, according to the law, data processor. We are like processing the data to serve our customers, but we are not owning the data. So still like our company, let's say Google, they own the data that they collect via surveys and whatever they derive from that. This is everything, this is theirs, and we are only allowed to do what's written in our contracts. And we have like a section which most of the customers sign that we are allowed to use the data for in aggregated and anonymized form, and this is very important to improve our products, also including machine learning services. But still, I think maybe even Serena mentioned that, let's say we might have like a company, let's say Coca-Cola, and they know that we are also partnering with Pepsi, right? And they wouldn't like that the data that they are storing on our servers would be used to help their competitor, right? So they might negotiate or even like require us to not use the data at all for any purpose, because they are afraid that they will lose the, for example, competitive advantage. So this can also happen. So, and this is quite, it creates a lot of complexity in terms of making sure that once, let's say, we are sitting at our computers and we want to start some experiments with the data to train some models, it takes a long way to make sure that the data we are using is the one which we can actually use for training purposes.
So what does that mean from a technical standpoint? It sounds like a data engineering problem. Maybe I'm using the wrong term, so feel free to correct me, but it sounds like a problem of trying to make sure that all the data that you're processing ends up in the right places, clearly labeled as being allowed to be used like this or like this. So if I am now a machine learning engineer at Qualtrics and I want to use a data set, is it easy for me to go and figure out internally where that data set lives that I can use, and I just don't even have access to the stuff that I'm not allowed to use? How does that work?
At Qualtrics, like engineers have access to like a lot of internal services. Like we have this trust approach that we just like when people start at Qualtrics, we are telling them that basically customer trust is very important. So we should pay like double, triple even check before we start like working with customer data directly and taking a look at the raw response data. But coming back to your question, we have some database which contains information about which brands are okay with using the data and which are not. So there's like a central database. But then whenever we are working on a specific use case, so let's say we want to train a model for detection of like a topic detection in text, or we want to train a model for response quality assessment. Very often those require some special considerations in terms that whenever we will take data from brands which are okay, then sometimes we need to think how to anonymize the data and how to aggregate the data in a proper way. We have a special committee for that. You would go with a proposal, then you have like a bunch of like experts from machine learning domain, from legal, from security team, and so on, and they will advise you how to prepare the data so you can then proceed with the training process. So sometimes you will already find that other teams already went that road because your use case is very similar, but very often there is something special about your plan, and this requires some special consultation. So this is basically the process we are running to make sure that once you are following this approved way of getting access to the data, it's fine. And sometimes it will require getting some additional approvals from customers. This is also very often the case that, okay, we cannot satisfy, let's say, anonymization criteria, or it wouldn't make sense to anonymize the data because we are losing signal, for instance, because we are interested in this, let's say, and this information that should be anonymized. But we can always go to the customer and ask for permission to do so. And then we can work, at least run some experiments to assess feasibility of a given idea, so to say.
It sounds like a lot of work, a lot of cross-functional collaboration. Some people might even think of it as bureaucracy. And I know some software engineers are allergic to bureaucracy or the thought of it. But also I know for a lot of our engineers coming from the Middle East and North Africa region, often people have worked at smaller companies where there aren't all these different teams. And it's a big change to join a bigger company. And we have our alumni sometimes asking us like, please prepare us better to understand how to work with HR and marketing and legal and all these different teams. So Mohammed, I want to ask you, as somebody who worked in Gaza before and then moved to Poland and is working for this larger company, and you work in DevOps, so I know this kind of relates somewhat to the kind of work you do. How would you explain it to somebody in the Middle East and North Africa, what Greg just said about working with all these different teams to get access to the data?
Sure. I haven't like worked in or in Gaza. Like immediately graduated, worked a little bit as a teaching assistant, and then joined Qualtrics. So I haven't experienced working in a smaller company. But what you can expect when working with, of course, like you have a cross-team communication is that you have a huge product that will be distributed or split to different teams. So whenever you got an issue, you most likely gonna have, let's say you're on call, you got an issue with the product. This is where you need to have this communication with different teams to make sure that you have some, let's say, some data was lost. So you need to make sure that where is this data in the pipeline? Somehow it is in the team number 3, for example. So yeah, that's like a common example we face in our daily job. And at the same time, of course, since you're building that product and this is just a split or like a part of a bigger product, there need to be some communication and work between these teams to make sure that everything will eventually fit in and the core features that the company is looking forward from the top is met at the end each quarter, for example.
What I love about the way you just described that is I think so often people go into software engineering, and especially when we talk about Gen AI, people think it's just technology. But actually, there's very much a human component to this, a collaboration component, and trying to get teams to work together to develop the best solutions. And it sounds like here, when we're talking about data, there's a lot of that, even to the point of bringing in legal experts to get advice on what data to use, or just to figure out where the data lives with another team. Does anybody else have anything else to add to this topic? Otherwise, I'm going to move us on to something that's very related to data, which is explainability and bias. One of the challenges, obviously, with generative AI is that it can be hard to know what the model developed and why, or what the recommendation was, what the answer was, and why. How are you all? First of all, if one of you could just explain what do we mean when we talk about explainability, and why are we even concerned about explainability or about bias? Maybe Serena, this is a question that you can take on.
Yeah, so I guess explainability and bias are two different things, but they are related. So I would say bias is maybe the model giving you different results based on who you're talking about. So the classic example is that a lot of large language models, if you ask it to generate, say, a sentence about a doctor, it will use male pronouns. If you ask it to generate a sentence about a nurse, it will use female pronouns. So there's a lot of like gender occupation bias that's encoded into a lot of these models. And the reason that these kinds of biases happen is because the underlying data is biased, either because maybe there's a different distribution, like say in software engineering, maybe more software engineers are men, so the data ends up being biased, but that's not necessarily what you want the text to generate. We wanted to treat everyone fairly. So we want to make sure that our models aren't biased, and explainability is something that can help with that. So the idea is, if you ask a model to give you a prediction, like my models give you, say, like a burnout score, it tells you if you're burnt out or not. A lot of people who will look at that and say, okay, well, I want to understand why the model thinks that I'm burnt out or not burnt out. Or you might want to understand why ChatGPT gave you the suggestions that it gave you. So explainability is a field of research. It's actually a huge field of research now in trying to figure out, when the model gives you a prediction, actually, where did that prediction come from? What factors influence that prediction? And why did it predict that versus something else? And this is a very hard problem, actually, with large language models and neural networks in general, because the internal workings of these models is like huge graphs of math, right? And there's all these numbers and no one really knows what they mean. But there's a lot of research that's been done in kind of tracing the decisions that the models make through those networks, and also looking at the input to be able to identify which parts of it actually influenced the prediction more. Yeah, so that's kind of what bias and explainability are. But these are both huge, huge research topics. So if you're concerned about that, there are actually a lot of research papers out there where people have assessed both of these things and tried to provide tools for them.
Thank you, Serena. And I think, Greg, that might be a good transition over to you. At Qualtrics, how are you thinking about explainability when you're working on AI and machine learning? How feasible is it still to really be able to understand why a model developed a certain recommendation or behaved a certain way?
Yeah. But maybe before going for that, I just wanted to mention that not only in the machine learning field or like among like scientists, we are aware that this explainability is important, but also from the legal perspective, because we have now these days, for example, automated solutions to assess your risk, whether you should get a credit, like whether you can borrow money from a bank or not, right? Or maybe even when you're applying for a visa, it might be that some automated system is making a decision about you. And in EU, and I think this is we already have some regulations on that we should have like people that are basically subject to those systems. We have the right for the explanation. We have the right to know why a certain decision was made about ourselves. And like also from that perspective in certain domains, this explainability aspect is very, very important because like the end user of that system needs to know why a certain decision was made. And with those big deep neural networks, it's quite hard to know exactly what was factored in. So basically, but this is like a force from the other direction, making sure that the systems we are developing, we cannot like more or less understand what they are doing. And going to Qualtrics.
Yeah, I just want to jump in to just say though, my partner actually works at a startup that works in machine learning explainability, and their customers include some of the biggest banks in the world, and other customers who very much need to be able to explain at the end of the day why a decision was made. And my understanding, obviously, I'm not an expert on this like you are, but it seems that a lot of companies that have to provide an answer, a really clear answer as to why you were or were not given a loan, for example, end up not using generative AI, and just generally moving away from machine learning as much as possible to very simple models that just say, if this, then this, because otherwise it is hard at the end of the day to explain why the model did what it did. So curious if that's true or not and how you're seeing that apply in your work.
Yeah, so basically it boils down to whether in a given project there is a need for explanation, right? Because, for example, if we are caring about, let's say, topic detection in text, then what we care about is whether our model at the end of the day has a high performance. We would like to detect as much of the topics that we defined with the highest possible accuracy. So, and then we don't really care about the explanation. Maybe there are like some tools which can help or can guide the development work. So the machine learning scientist working on that problem can use some tools which are, for example, highlighting which part of the input text was considered when making a particular prediction, like in terms that this part of sentence had the biggest influence. So probably within that subtext, a given topic should be mentioned. And if this is the case, you can develop the trust that the model is doing the right thing. But it's in this case, our customers, let's say using Qualtrics, and we have this kind of functionality, they don't really care about this. They would just come to us, hey, this is working okay, or they will just complain. And we can see this that because they are editing our automated suggestions. But on the other hand, we have other projects. Let's say right now we have a project which is about automatic response quality assessment. So whether a respondent took time to understand questions, good answers to open-ended questions were given, which makes sense in the context of a given question. And in this context, we sometimes our customer would like to understand why we are flagging a given response as a low quality, for instance. And we are like also taking this into account when developing the whole system, the whole algorithm, that we should have, even if we are going with a like a complicated neural network, we would like to use maybe some set of features that are going into the model, which are explainable, which you can understand. But like very often this is like a trade-off. So it's this is my answer. So it depends on the project most of the time. And we are not that subject to those legal procedures as of now, that we are required to provide explanations.
We also trying to understand what our customers need to trust. for example, generated by AI texts, and how to estimate if the summary of something is right or wrong. So in UX design team, we are working on first tools and patterns to our end users that this part of the generated message is from AI and this is based on something else. And second, we are cooperating with UX researchers to understand what is actually needed and what value our customers have when they are seeing some answers from AI and when they are using AI. So we are trying to also understand this part of the AI world.
I love that you're bringing that up, Luciana. As a UX designer, you're really making sure that customers understand what is happening. Is this generated by a human, or is this Gen AI that created this text that I'm reading right now, right? And do I want my data to be involved or not? So it's important not only that the technology work, but also that the user interface or the user experience is done in such a way that customers can understand it. Anything else that's important from the user experience standpoint, Luciana?
I think that first of all, we are trying to build a trust, but also transparency in general. Like when we are using AI, we are explaining why. But also when we are designing something, we are aware of bias in words. So gender bias, for example, but all other bias that exist and that were used, like biased data were used to train a lot of models. So we are aware of that. And when we are trying to design something based on the data, we are checking and brainstorming and making sure that we identified and removed as many discrimination mechanism and biased answered as possible. And this is like huge topic for all discussions when designing something with AI in mind. So
what's an example of that? How do you actually clean up data or try to take bias out of data before using it?
So this is actually the conversation that we have in partnership with scientists and software engineers. Our responsibility is just flag and start this conversation and be sure that we have aligned point of view on how to remove and limit this influence of bias data.
So as a user, as a designer, a user experience designer, an expert, you're the one flagging the problem, just saying there's a problem with the data set we're using here. It is biased. And then the software engineers need to work to figure out how to clean up or fix the data set. Understood. I think that's actually a great transition to a question about just generally diversity and AI. And I think in our region, and something that aligns really well with Manara's mission is talking about women in AI. You mentioned, Luciana, that some of the data sets are biased and they will make it seem, for instance, that somebody is a man if they're a doctor when they could just as much be a woman when they're a doctor. What else comes to mind, if anything, for women who are on this call, who are working as software engineers and who want to make sure that they're really contributing or thinking about Gen AI from the angle of a woman? What other advice or thoughts do you have, Serena or Luciana, or anybody else on this call? Serena, let's start with you.
Sure. So I think a lot of times we think about diversity as like this thing that we should do because it's the right thing to do because, you know, everyone is important, which it is, but also there's been a lot of research that shows that teams that are more diverse are more innovative and more productive because they have this variety of ideas. And there's also research that shows that communication is a little bit more difficult with more diverse sets of people, obviously, because people come from different backgrounds. So I think having good team communication is really important, but it can actually give better results. Just one example, I don't know if you all remember, but at some point the iPhone came out with this new iPhone and it was really big, and everyone I talked to who was a man was like, oh, this is so great, the screen is so big. But people started complaining that the phone was too big to hold in your hand and really work with. And it turns out it was because most of the engineers who designed this phone were men with larger hands, and it was comfortable for them. But for people with smaller hands, the phone was too big, and they actually ended up making a second version of the phone that was smaller because so many people complained that the phone was too big. And I think the root of that problem was just that the people who designed the phone were all too similar to each other. And had they had more diversity in hand size or gender or whatever, then these problems would have come up. So, I mean, my advice is it's great that there's so many women on this call. I think even in the time that I've been in tech, I've seen more and more women, and that's really great. And not only like is it great for us, it's also great for companies. So if you walk in and there's not very many women, or you don't look like the other people who are on your team, that's actually a good thing for your company. That means that your company needs you and they need your perspective. And I think the AI revolution is showing us that AI is for everyone. And I think there's definitely space for everyone.
Thank you so much
Uh,
for sharing that, Lucinda. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so I would like to add one thing, because as the woman, I'm struggling with imposter syndrome sometimes, and with uh, things that, because I'm in male area, technical field, it is easier for me to doubt myself. So last performance cycle, so something that we have here, I've just used AI to generate the summary based on feedback that I gathered, without this bias that I'm adding to when I'm reading the feedback. Because when I'm reading those feedbacks, I feel, okay, it was small, it's not enough, and I'm always doubting in things that I'm reading. But AI provided me the summary that helped me advertise myself, my own brand, and to clear that perspective. So I really recommend to use the AI to just provide additional perspective for yourself, about yourself, and about the fields that you're entering.
That is such a great idea. I hadn't thought of that at all. So you're using it, just to make sure we understood that, it was the time of year when you get feedback from your team and your manager, and you put all of that feedback into ChatGPT or some tool like that, and then asked it for a summary, and the summary made you feel more confident in yourself. Is that how it works?
I've asked for strong sides based on that feedback, and area of improvements, and short summary of that. So I tested few prompts about that, and it helped me a lot to understand where I am.
That's great. So you can actually use it almost like a coach. It can encourage you. You don't even have to pay a lot of money for somebody to encourage you. It can just do it itself. That's wonderful. So in a way, it's removing your own bias from the way that you look at yourself. We're going to be moving to Q&A soon, but before we do, I would love to get any last thoughts from speakers. For the Q&A, we are going to be looking at the Q&A section of Zoom. And then also we got some questions before the webinar from people who were planning to join. So I will also be asking some of those questions. I will be asking the questions, and if they're not clear, then I will be letting the audience know that the question wasn't clear, and then you can write in the chat to clarify your question. But before we move on to the Q&A, any last thoughts from anybody on this panel related to AI and how you're using it, how you recommend people use it, any risks that people should be paying attention to, or any of the other topics that came up?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate something that Greg said earlier, which was about using the right tool for the job. I think there's a lot of hype around AI right now and GPT, and people want to use it for everything. But the reality is it's really, really great at certain things like summarization, but it's not the best tool for every task. Sometimes, you know, if you want to do a simple statistical analysis or math, like there's Python packages for that. There's code for that. That's not AI. That's really, really good. So look at all of the tools that are available to you. If GPT is the best one, that's great, but maybe it's not. Maybe there's something simpler that's cheaper and easier to use. So I think what Greg said was think of it as a tool in your toolbox, but there's also lots of other things out there. And then the other thing I think is just transparency with users is people want to know how their data is being used. They want to know if you're using AI. So it's fine if you are, just make it clear to your users what's happening behind the scenes. And then I think that will gain a lot of trust in your product.
Thank you, Serena. Who else?
I guess, yeah, from a developer standpoint, I guess that whenever like you want to use AI, do not blindly use it. Just make sure like, or you can use it like as a starting point in case you're facing an issue or in case you want to build something. Have some template generated from that. Get an idea about it. Use it as a guide, but don't like blindly use it directly. Make sure like you can test it first. It fit the context you want to use it in your repo or your code structure. And yeah, that's something I want to just mention.
And maybe something from my side, I guess, it's important to build intuitions about how certain things work. Let's say LLMs. It's not very difficult to, like, on a high level, to understand how those things are being trained. That they are just like big, like mathematical models that are predicting the next word or the next letter, and that they are just being trained on a big chunk of internet to just predict the next word. And it's very difficult to ensure that the quality of the data which is going into this model is of high quality. And like this is, and then once you have this intuition, then you can also, like, using just your own mind without any PhD even, get a feeling what those models can do. And then also like then maybe just like seeing also you can build your intuition and by trying those tools on your own. And then I guess this is something which is quite important to stay on top, because it's very time consuming to read all the papers, but just to, like, on a high level, understand how those things work, and then based on that you can better assess whether it makes sense to use it for a certain scenario or not. Yeah.
Yeah, so not just using it, but actually reading the research behind it, understanding how it works.
But not
And
necessarily research. Like, you'll find a lot of YouTube videos, for instance, of high quality, which are explaining on a high level with nice pictures and diagrams. So we can build some intuitions. That's sufficient. You don't need to know the math behind that. Just to know, like, on a high level how those things are being trained. And there is plenty of material on the internet, which help you to get, like, up to speed in a short amount of time.
YouTube University, one of the best places to go learn. No, it's true. It's
It's true,
absolutely
that's
helpful. It is true. No, I'm not trying to be funny. I would like calling it YouTube University because it's true. It's actually a place where people can learn a lot, and the visual aspect of it can also be super, super helpful. And people have already taken the time to read the research and summarize it in a way that's much more efficient for you to process. Anybody else have anything you want to add before we switch over to Q&A?
I think that what Grzegorz said, that you should test it and you should try to use AI is really important, because we asked this question like 1 year ago: are we going to be replaced by AI in near future? And I think I really like the answer for that question. We are not going to be replaced by AI, but we are going to be replaced by people who can use AI efficiently. And that's why you should think about AI as advantage entering the software engineer roles and IT in general. It is like new tool that you can use as your advantage entering this world.
Thank you all so much. I think I'm going to take a set of questions that relates a lot to what we've been talking about, but takes it in a bit of a different direction. We have been talking about how any engineer should and can be using generative AI, how anybody in any role can be using generative AI, because it's also being used in user research, for instance, and in your personal lives. I see a lot of questions being asked by the audience about how to get into a machine learning role or into a role where I guess engineers would be more involved in the AI aspect, not just using the tools, but actually building them. And so I'm not sure if that's who wants to answer that question, but would love to get your advice on what does it take to become a machine learning engineer, and how are these roles evolving? Are they even still called machine learning engineer now that Gen AI exists, or are there other new types of roles that have evolved?
So I can take this question, maybe start answering this. So for instance, at Qualtrics, we have applied scientists, which is a role which is working on the model development, so doing actual modeling work and running experiments, analyzing results, and finding ways to improve and designing experiments. Then we also have machine learning engineers, so people that are responsible for creating services or like writing code that pulls the data, for instance. So aggregates the data, anonymizes the data for the training, and then when serving our customers, to write a service, which is basically running the model, then making sure that you can deploy a new version of a model in a streamlined, in an easy way. And also making sure that we can monitor the service, for instance, according to scientists' guidelines, that, for instance, we can detect situations where the model suddenly starts to produce, let's say, low quality predictions, which is possible in some scenarios. Yeah, and we also have, for instance, knowledge engineering team, which is responsible for data annotations. Which is also like what we need for model development. We need to have data with labels in in lots of scenarios. So we also have a dedicated team which is helping us to define the task, make sure that we have guidelines for annotations, and then we're finding people for those tasks. We like quite often we also like hire contractors to perform some tasks, for example, when a specific language is needed.
So to summarize it, there's the data annotating team, which is making sure data is clearly labeled so it can be ingested into models. Then there's the data science team, or I think you called it applied science team, that is actually building the models. And then there's the machine learning team that's doing everything around connecting those models, getting them trained or getting them deployed. And so I think for our community and the questions I'm seeing, probably the data science roles and the machine learning roles are the ones that people are most interested in. And we're getting some questions about what are the skills necessary to build a career in that direction, or how to go about learning those things to become a machine learning engineer or a data scientist. Any quick advice? Maybe Serena, I see you also unmuting yourself, so we can maybe go to you, and then Greg, feel free to chime in if we missed anything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the best case scenario is like if you have a PhD in machine learning, but because the field changes so fast, I'd say like a strong foundation in computer science in general is a great place to start. So if you're already a software engineer, it's actually not that much work to just learn about models and learn that extra level of stuff if you have the experience in, especially for machine learning engineering. It is a lot of software engineering that's just geared specifically for machine learning. So if you haven't specialized in machine learning yet, you still have time to do that. But yeah, I think having a strong foundation in algorithms and in computer science theory is really helpful. But yeah, if you're interested in a master's or a PhD, even if you do something in the field of machine learning, because things change so fast, like when I started my PhD, large language models were not a thing yet. GPT wasn't really a thing yet. Like I don't think neural networks were in heavy use until after I got my master's degree. So there's always time to pivot. So I'd say just investing in strong foundational coding skills, algorithm skills. And there are a lot of courses online also for machine learning and for using the different toolkits that are available. So if you spend a little time to educate yourself, like you said, YouTube University, Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities to get into the field that way.
Yeah, and I guess like a big part of the job that applied scientist is doing is coding. So we need to run a lot of experiments. So you need to code quite well, be very fluent in some programming language. Of course, like in the machine learning field, Python is very dominant. So this is quite important. And also familiarity with cloud computing and distributed systems and dedicated services, which are for machine learning use cases. Let's say at Qualtrics we're using AWS SageMaker, but there are also other providers. So like also knowing how to work with those tools in an efficient way, it's very essential actually. And I would even say that if you are a good software engineer that can code and write clean code in a fast way, which makes it easy to, let's say, transition into production setting. It doesn't take too much time, for example, to adjust the code that you've written for a production use case, and you are familiar with distributed systems and cloud computing. I would take that person and then teach that person, let's say, some ML concepts, rather than take a person which was doing only research on neural networks with like pen and paper, doing like heavy hardcore matrix multiplications, because like, okay, you know this stuff, but you need to like put this into practice. I'm just saying about a company like Qualtrics, where there is like a big focus on like applied science, right?
Yes, no, I love that idea, and I see that in the market in general. We see it from all of our hiring partners, and I want to make that really clear to this audience. We got a lot of questions asking for specific recommendations for specific courses to take to learn to be better at AI or machine learning. And I think that general answer, that being a really good software engineer, actually experiencing working as a software engineer, is one of the best foundations. And often we see our partners would prefer to hire somebody into a machine learning role after they've first worked in a core software engineering role, and then make the switch over. Let's answer a few more questions that are related to the AI topic, and then we promised people we would also use this time to answer many broader questions, and I see that broader questions are being asked about Qualtrics, about Manara, and about careers in software engineering in general. But the last questions that I'm seeing related to AI, there's one interesting one from Abdul Qadir Haddad asking about edge cases and fail safes in AI models and how they're used. I'm not sure I understand the question completely, but it seems like the question in general is, if you're using an AI model, how can an AI model be effective in a scenario where there are lots of edge cases? Is that a question that the panel would be able to take?
Yeah, I guess I can answer this. So certainly there's a lot of edge cases, and this is basically the hard part of our jobs, to understand how our model performs in those edge cases, and also to understand with a product manager or a business person which is active on the project, whether it's important for us to get those edge cases right, because in some situations those edge cases amount for a tiny percentage of, let's say, situations that can happen in a real scenario. So we sometimes will just tend to ignore them, and possibly creating some mechanism that can detect those edge cases, and then we just wouldn't process them, and then maybe the user will see that in this case we are not able to make a prediction, or we will fall back to some simple logic, which is like if else roles to provide response to that request. So I guess this is something important, and this is basically most of the work that applied scientists do when analyzing models' performance, to understand where those edge cases are, and they require experience with a given model, and also solid understanding of the data you're working on. And most of the time it's not on model development, it's just looking at the data, slicing and dicing, looking from different perspectives, also very often clarifying some questions with a person which has domain expertise, and then understanding what is important to get right, and also assessing what kind of mistakes are costly, like could be expensive if we made them, because sometimes some mistakes are not that important. We can do them, we can ignore them, for example, when evaluating our models, but some errors are quite important to avoid, because it can like have significant impact. in a certain application. So I hope this answered the question.
Thank you so much. And if it hasn't, it sounds like it has. I see Abdul Qadir writing. Thank you, Greg. There was a question that we received before the event that I think is related to this. And again, anyone on the panel can answer it, which is how reliable is AI? To what extent can we rely on it? Are there potential vulnerabilities that could transform it into a tool of harm? Anyone on the panel want to take that one?
I can
We
start
are
talking.
looking
Let's
for
let's have Lutsuna start, and then Greg, you can fill in if there's more that you want to add.
So I have fast answer for now, just as the AI user and UX designer, not someone who is creating the models. I don't personally, I don't trust AI so much. I'm treating it as the nice starting point, but it is a nice exercise to doubt in everything that AI is saying to you and just checking from where do you know that and how do you, are you sure? And quite like that are showing you then if you can trust this one answer or not. I've once checked the grammar rules for Japanese. So I've checked if it can recommend me where to break the sentence in accordance to Japanese grammar rules. And AI said to me that there are 5 cases where I can break the sentence. And then I checked it with the person who knows the Japan language, and it occurs that it was totally wrong. All answers that ChatGPT gave me were bad, at least. So doubt and test it and try to get better answers, but always think about it as just as a starting point and the inspiration, not the answer.
Thank you so much. Greg, did you want to add something to that? Because we have some more questions we'll want to go through, but feel free to jump in if you'd like.
Yeah, so let's go to the next question.
We're almost done with the set of questions on AI topics, but I do have 2 more that I want to make sure we ask here. One is related to tools for software engineers. Everyone knows about ChatGPT. Are there other tools for prompt engineering or other tools that really leverage Gen AI specifically in a software engineering context that everyone should be aware of?
I'm just thinking, like certainly those plugins, which you can, for example, when you're using like your favorite IDE, typically there is some plugin which is not only providing like chat interface, but also like some other capabilities. So it makes sense to learn those capabilities. Let's say it can automatically generate test cases, test functions for your code. It can like also generate some code stubs like templates and so on. So it makes sense to know them. And I think right now there is plenty of startups or companies which are coming up with different ideas. So let's say there is right now a plugin which is acting as a code reviewer whenever you are submitting a pull request or merge request to GitHub or GitLab. It can automatically take a look at the code that you've written and then submit some comments and suggestions. So certainly it is. Yeah, and I came across recently that you can use also LLMs to chat with documentation, basically. So to some extent, those large language models know what you can do in a certain language, but if you are working in some like narrow or very infrequent use case, you might consider even prototyping something which you can put there like a lot of documents, and then you can chat with them to learn what's in there in a quicker way, for instance. So I think we are still in the time where we are still waiting for those tools to see what we can do with them. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have one more question. Nobody's asked this, but I feel like people should. Are people expected to use these tools or any Gen AI kind of tool, including ChatGPT, during interviews when they're applying to companies nowadays? Or is the expectation still that they just be, coding the way that you used to before these tools were available?
I think this is I think we are I don't know whether we have like a strict policy about this. Like, to be honest, I wasn't interviewing in the recent months. Yeah, but I guess it's not only about, like, the interviews are not only about coding, they are also about how you are getting along with that person, and then just having a conversation, seeing how a person is approaching a given problem. And then at that point, I wouldn't expect someone using ChatGPT as a like brain replacement, right? We need to have a normal conversation. I need to be able to see how you are thinking through the problem, what kind of questions you're asking. And I guess this is the most important part. And then if at the end of the day, you will end up using ChatGPT in a transparent way, of course, not trying to cheat on the side, then I would be, guess, fine with that.
Awesome. So
yeah.
as long as you can see how they're thinking and that they're using it as a tool, just like they would at work, where they're still really using their own brain and just, using the tool just to speed up some parts, and they're showing you how they're using it in a way that's good, right? You get to assess whether they're using the tool in a way that demonstrates the kind of thinking that you would like a software engineer to be doing. But you don't know if there's a specific policy at Qualtrics or not about it. Mohamed, I saw you unmute yourself as well.
Yeah, like from my perspective, I mean, like Greg was saying, it was like similar to what he was saying. I mean, just like when we're like assessing some candidate, it's not about syntax, but how he thinks. So he's allowed to just use Google, use some documentation. He's a programmer at the end of the day, so that's his source of truth on how he knows if that's gonna work as expected or not, the return value of some method or a few things like that. So, I mean, in this time, it is more popular right now to use generative AI tools, in addition to Googling stuff. So yeah, it like it wouldn't be a harm or a huge red signal for that candidate that he's doing something wrong, as long as he's thinking and communicating with that tool, but not mainly using that tool.
Yeah. One tip I always have for people who are interviewing is to just ask if they're not sure, like, hey, is it okay if I pull up ChatGPT and use it here? Because interviews are interactive, right? And I definitely know some companies where the expectation now very much is that you're using it. And so if you just assume that you're not supposed to use it, then that could be the wrong assumption. I see several questions related to work at Qualtrics, so I'm going to go ahead and get those answered now. One of the questions is, what programming stack do you use at Qualtrics? And I think really that also probably is wondering, how important is it to know that stack in order to get hired at Qualtrics? Serena, it looks like that could be a question for you to answer.
Sure. Yeah, like I think Greg said earlier, Python is the language that most people use for machine learning. It kind of depends what role you're in, what's like full stack you'll end up using. I know we use a bunch of different types of databases. Trying to think if there's anything else that we use. We use GitHub, so I think that's the most popular like code change tracking tool. So being familiar with GitHub and like branches and being able to work on code with a lot of different people, doing code reviews. Yeah, I think those are the main things if you want to be an applied scientist. When I started, it was all Java. The front end, has different things, but yeah, if you want to get into machine learning, I would say Python is definitely the way to go.
And what about for other roles at Qualtrics outside of machine learning roles? And this can be a question, I guess, maybe for Mohamed.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to my organization, XM Discover, we're mostly like focusing on the back end. So we'd use mainly Java. And recently we, at least in my team, started working with Go to simplify, or when we were building our new microservices. When it comes to, I would probably mention something that's common, not just in Discover, but in the rest of Qualtrics, that for our CI/CD tool, we use Jenkins. We use Nomad as our orchestrator or a way to deploy our applications. Monitoring Splunk, Grafana are common ones we use, and yeah, that's something common. Also, like in Qualtrics. Yeah, that's probably
Thank
most
you.
of the things we use.
And I know from our partnership with Qualtrics that which technical stack matters less than really understanding the computer science fundamentals, understanding cloud computing, understanding how to work together with other software engineers, and just generally how you think at the time that you're applying. So I also want to really encourage everybody here to think beyond just the technologies that are necessary. And the practical experience as much as possible, as well as those computer science fundamentals. Of course, if I said anything wrong, please feel free to correct me, Qualtrics, because you all know your needs better than I do. There is a question here about whether Qualtrics is hiring software engineers now. If so, in which field and level? I know that for our partnership at Manara with Qualtrics, that absolutely Qualtrics is hiring now and will be hiring more later this year as well. And that the general approach seems to be to bring people in and then kind of assign to specific teams after arriving. There seems to be a big need for back-end engineers always, and especially at what's called L4 and above. So people who have kind of 3 or more years of work experience are especially in high demand. Anyone from the Qualtrics team want to add or clarify anything related to that? And I think the roles right now tend to be mostly in Poland and the office that Mohamed is in Krakow.
Yeah, this is true. Like right now, Qualtrics is putting a lot of focus on the Krakow office. Yeah, and like we are expected to grow by a significant number. And right now we have a lot of open roles. Yeah, that's true. Basically what you said.
Great. And if you do want to apply to Qualtrics, you can go directly, or you can also go through Manara. If you go through Manara, then you'll get a really clear understanding of whether you're a good fit or not and why, and support with the application process and a kind of more hands-on experience. Okay, so now I see some general questions about career, and then the last questions we'll answer will be around Manara specifically. For career, I see a question that was being asked in the chat from somebody who is in university right now and is wondering whether to take a gap year to catch up on all these technologies and to figure out her own passion because she feels like between everything that's going on in university already, it's hard to find extra time to basically choose a career path and keep up to date with the latest technologies. So what is your advice for that? Anybody from the panel?
Yeah, from my perspective, like I would say, like if it feels better to take that gap year, then go ahead and do it. I'm not sure like what is the current circumstances you're facing, but I would advise to make use of summertime. This is how I really built like my stack. Like before I joined Qualtrics, I was mostly native Android developer, and this is how I didn't face issues when I was working as Java backend engineer, because with native Android development, we were mostly working with Java or Kotlin. But anyway, I would say like make use of your summertime. That would be like 3 months is already enough. If you multiply it by 4 years or 5 years, it's enough to catch up with most of the technologies. And again, like what I was mentioning earlier in this webinar, if you can, I mean, even I am working right now 8 hours per day, but if I'm interested about something, if I'm curious to learn about something, I would definitely get some time after work, let's say from 6 to 8 or something like this. I'm not saying like 2 hours, but just give it some time. Try to, if you are passionate about it, if you're interested to build something, you go like look in the future and see what you can build with that. Then that's something that wouldn't seem like a work. It would seem something fun you can spend your time on.
I just wanted to add that if it's possible to get an internship, I think that's a really great way to figure out if you enjoy a certain job. So if you can get an internship in the kind of role that you're interested in pursuing long term, even if it's just over the summer, that will give you a taste of what it's like, and hopefully an indication of whether you're really passionate about it or not. But I would say definitely make sure that you finish your degree, because having that on your resume will help you a lot. And yeah, as far as keeping up with technologies, it's hard because it's moving so fast, and a year from now, the main thing is going to be different probably. So yeah, but I feel your feeling of being behind. That is how the field is, and it's okay if you don't know everything. Like, no one knows everything because it's moving so fast. But yeah, I think an internship would be great, or to maybe do a small project around something that you're interested over the summer, and see how you feel about it.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to add one thing to that, and then we're going to I'll quickly answer some questions related to Manara, and then we're going to need to wrap up soon because our time is coming to an end here. I wanted to just add to what you all already said so beautifully, that you really do need to prioritize what's right for you. And I find that women especially, more so even than men, tend to prioritize school because it's all about getting the best grade at school, a 98%. And that ultimately is not what's going to make you most successful in your career. What will make you more successful is to get an internship during the summer, to work on projects, to build your practical skills, and to really understand the core computer science fundamentals. So remember that whether you're in school now or if you're working, because I see somebody who posted something about working, you have to take your future into your own hands, and kind of carve out the time that you want for the things that are more important. So I see a lot of questions related to Manara and what we do and don't help with. For that, it's best for you to look at our website. The short version is that Manara is really here to help software engineers, including ones who are still in university or graduating soon, with becoming world-class, building world-class careers. And that includes learning the skills necessary to get jobs at companies like Qualtrics. I think everything else that you have questions about Manara for, I'm going to ask you to just email us at support@manara.tech. We can write that down in the channel as well here. That anything that you have any questions about Manara from, please reach out to us at support@manara.tech. And we can answer your specific questions about Manara. Or you can reach out to us on our social media. We will also be running more events in the future that is specifically about Manara and how we can support you. So sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already, or make sure that we keep you updated on those. I think that's all I want to say about our plans at Manara and how we can support you right now. I am so grateful to the speakers for everything that you have contributed to the session today. Our audience has remained large all the way until the end, which shows what an engaging topic and panel this has been. Thank you all so very much. Have wonderful evenings. And we hope to welcome you again to a panel in the future. We will be running another panel soon for people who are interested in joining Qualtrics specifically as well. So if you signed up for this event and you mark that you would like to receive more emails in the future, you will also be getting more information about Qualtrics specifically and the roles that are open there and how you can apply. Thank you, everyone, and good night. You can unmute yourselves and just say good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.